Hello, and welcome to another Industry Careers for PhDs podcast brought to you by Cheeky Scientist. I'm your host, Isaiah Henkel, and today we will be talking to Edvard Glücksman on careers environmental science. If you'd like to listen to the full version of this interview, go to cheekyscientist.com/association and learn how you can become an associate and get access to our full materials and our private networking group, specifically for helping PhDs transition into industry. If you'd like these highlights when they are released, delivered to your email inbox, just go to cheekyscientist.com and sign up under where it says Start Here. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Today we will be talking again about environmental science with Edvard. He is a chartered scientist with a broad-based educational and professional background. At Wardell Armstrong, he specializes, this is where he's currently at, he specializes in environmental and social impact assessment, especially in the context of lending criteria prescribed by major financial institutions. He also works with the integration of ecosystem services within impact assessments and applied policy around biodiversity. If you have no idea what some of these words mean, don't worry, Edvard is going to explain them. His most recent work has focused on CIS countries, in particular within Kazakhstan's mining sector. At the same time, Edvard is an associate fellow of the Higher Education Academy and holds an affiliation with the University of Exeter, where he teaches on modules relating to sustainability, industry-community relations, corporate social responsibility, and the multifaceted array of challenges faced by the Arctic region. He's highly engaged, in science still. He's a great communicator. He writes extensively online, many articles about this field. He has worked professionally for Europe's largest organization in the Earth and planetary sciences. He holds a doctorate as well as a MS in zoology from the University of Oxford. And we're really looking forward to talking to Edvard today. So we're going to jump in with him now. Thank you very much for being with us today, Ed.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a very impressive background. One question we always like to start with is, okay, how did you make this transition happen? What did your transition from academia, right, from getting your PhD into this industry career look like? Maybe you can kind of take us back through what your transition looked like specifically for you.
Well, I can. I think that I was always a little bit of an anomaly, even though my PhD was in lab-based science. I did a molecular biology PhD looking at the diversity of protozoa, very lab-focused, but I always had an interest in policy and communications, and wherever possible during my university career, I always tried to take on roles, either in my free time or professionally, where I could explore that at the same time as doing science at the bench. And I think that might stem also from the fact that I did do a Bachelor of Arts at the beginning of my educational career. So I did 2 undergrads, moved into science, ended up doing a very lab-based PhD. But then when I finished my PhD, I wanted to take that step out and see what it was like outside of life in the lab, and I've been working in a series of halfway houses, let's say, over the past 4 or 5 years. So I worked in communications, I worked in policy, and in the end ended up in the job I'm doing now.
Fantastic. And I want to stay on this for a minute longer and talk a little bit about why. So why did you want to leave? Why not continue these pursuits in academia? Why did you want to leave academia for industry?
I think it's about the subject. I think that I'm more of a big picture type person, and I knew from the beginning that I thrive doing bigger picture work than working in a lab. I really enjoyed my lab work, and I learned a lot, and it was really going against in a sense, my natural instincts to work in a lab. But for me, that was part of the challenge. But I couldn't see myself spending the next decade or even longer doing lab work and continuing publishing papers traditionally as you do in academia. I wanted to take a step back and work in a way with the same material, but at a level of policy and communications where you can kind of understand the research and then work with it rather than doing the research in itself.
No, and that's good for all of you to hear, because many of you, let's say your experience with academia may not have been bad. It just wasn't, it wasn't a good fit for you, and maybe you struggled to articulate why it wasn't a good fit. And so, hearing some of these things like, okay, you want to be involved with a larger picture, you want to go beyond just publishing to do, see some of the work that you do take effect in this lifetime. I think that's good to hear from other people. So thanks, Ed. So you transitioned into industry, and so let's talk about those early days in after your transition. Let's jump to this question. What were the challenges you did face after you transitioned, or as you started to enter in this profession in the early days?
Well, I'd been in university for a long time, because I did the 2 undergrads, which took 7 years combined, plus master's, plus PhD. So I was on about 13 years of education at that point, and so any transition, as you call it, any change would have been relatively difficult, like taking on a new role, and just the way of working is very different once you leave that academic life. Of course, I continued on with a kind of half lab-based postdoc at one point afterwards, and that was a little bit more familiar. But in the end, the big step I think was jumping into the job I'm in right now, which is the environmental consultancy job, which I've been in for about 1.5 years now, even though I worked with the same consultancy from the academic side for over 1 year before that. And I think that for me the difficulty was really just getting used to the new way of life, if you will, the 9 to 5 part of it, the having a boss part of it, and then moving on from there. So I'm happy to answer any more questions if you want specifics.
Yeah, no, because I think this is important. We have a lot of PhDs, especially STEM PhDs, that I guess have a limited understanding of what options are out there. And environmental science, certainly when I was in grad school, didn't even come to my mind. So maybe we can just start very, very basic. Can you tell us what environmental science is?
Well, in my opinion, it's very broad. So it covers anything from the very nitty-gritty academic subjects that I was dealing with for my PhD, looking at diversity, ecology, and evolution of specific species or even subspecies. But then if you step back, you can look at it in the big picture, looking at the ecology of ecosystems, and stepping back even further, just looking at how the living world functions. And I think that it's very important to understand that basically anything that's out there you can consider part of environmental science. We used to, at St. Andrews, they used to divide biology or even the sciences actually up into red and green and brown. So you'd have the red would be the medical sciences, anything to do with the human body. Green would be anything else, basically, and brown would be the chemistry part. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. I would say anything that you can't call medical research would, in my opinion, fit into that environmental science bit.
Okay, great. So that's kind of a basic overview. What is consultancy in environmental science, or environmental consultancy? What you do? Maybe you can talk to us. Assuming somebody has no idea about that position at all, how would you describe it?
Well, I think it's very reasonable not to have any idea, because I didn't before I got into it. And for me, consultancy was always a bit of a question mark. What do consultants really do? I heard so much about it. You hear about maybe the lifestyle or the money, or the financial consultants are the ones that I think are the most famous, the people working at McKinsey or BCG. But this is very different. Environmental consultancy often does a very similar job to what you do in academia, but very, very applied. So I would say 100% applied compared to the 90% theoretical, 10% applied that you're used to in academia. So For example, at my consultancy, we're very broad-based, but coming from a history of mining and big industry. So looking at environmental surveys that often relate to the construction or the operation of a big industrial site, and looking at all the aspects around that, air quality, water quality, soil, looking at ecosystem services, how species interact with each other, looking at social impacts around that. All of that is considered part of the remit of this organization, but also looking at geology and engineering as part of that too, and overlaying them. So in this case, at this consultancy, and we have many actually around the world that are very similar, that compete. These are organizations that are very broad and very flexible, because every single job we do that we're commissioned to do is completely different in a unique environment, and it could be absolutely anywhere in the world. So have to be pretty adaptable.
Okay, so how, a lot of PhDs, STEM PhDs, they understand, what management consulting is. So how might this differ from management consulting?
Well, management consulting, you're brought in to an organization or institution in order to help them with their finances, with their efficiency, and with maximizing profit. This is not the case for most of the work we do. We do work closely with financial institutions, but we do that for a different reason altogether. At the moment, there's a real push for banks, lending institutions, to reduce their risk when they make investments in large projects around the world. And you can stop me and ask questions if this gets complicated. But basically, the idea is that nobody's going to give money to a project or lend money to a project anywhere in the world that's going to risk them their reputation or their money. And that's how we deal with finances, not like traditional financial consultants who maybe help a bank out or help out accounting firms. We will actually help any kind of industry around the world deal with their environmental issues so that they are compliant with standards that their lenders around the world will be happy with. And so it's part of a financial process, but it's very much removed from what you would consider the traditional financial consulting role.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, environmental science in general, it's a very, very hot field right now, and it's expanding. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the field overall and some of the trends that you see currently.
Well, I think that the big buzzwords right now in the field they relate to ecosystem services. So, in other words, what is the environment worth? Putting a price on what we get from the environment, the cleaning of the air, the filtering of the water, things that traditionally you didn't think about before. That also includes biodiversity. So, if you want to think about this in a very specific way, if you take an area that you want to plan to put up an industrial site, you want to maybe start a mine somewhere, looking at what do the local rivers offer the people? Do they go fishing there? Do they go swimming? Any kind of recreation? Are there mushrooms, berries? Is there hunting going on? All of this is part of what we consider ecosystem services. So that's one very hot topic, is putting a value on nature and trying to make sure you minimize the risk to that. The second a really hot topic, in my opinion, and one that's becoming huge now, is social impact of industry, and how that also relates to the environmental sciences. So looking at how people, and this is where my initial sociology degree comes into very helpful, is that looking at how people are affected by changes to their environment, and that is very much their natural environment. And the problem with this for the traditional lab scientist is, of course, that it involves also knowing about a bit about the social sciences. You don't have to be trained in it like I was lucky to be at university, but you've got to know a little bit about the methods used by social scientists and the way that social science thinks. And this is becoming a very hot topic now, as we can see in terms of investment on work dealing with social impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, right? Because some of you listening might be like, well, if I didn't get a good degree in zoology, it doesn't matter. I mean, your scientific background gives you the tools you need to get into these positions. But just like we've talked about before, you have to develop your transferable skills. In this case, just tend to be social science skills, right? So skills that will help you thrive in the position. And you can develop these where you are now, and likely you've already developed many of them. I want to come back to skills, but first I want to break it down. So we have a good idea. I think we've set the foundation here for what exactly it is you do. And like me, I heard environmental science when I was in grad school, whatever. But I don't really know what that is. I'm not in that field. It doesn't sound very glamorous, but in fact it is. Companies are paying a lot of money for these positions right now. It definitely is a very quickly growing sector from the numbers I've looked at, and I'm glad we talked about that. But I do want to know, okay, let's demystify what you do on a day-to-day basis now. You talked a little bit about it. You're a consultant. In general, when people say consultant, they have a hard time knowing what they do. Maybe you can say, okay, this is what I would spend my time doing. Like, you wake up, how do you spend your day? Maybe tell us what like an average week might look like.
Sure. The beauty of what I do, I think, is that I jump between projects quite quickly, and that's something that fits me very well because I get impatient if I work on the same project for a long period of time. What happens is I generally work at an office. I go in, relatively speaking, 9 to 5. And what happens is my company, through my line managers and further up, they bid for projects anywhere in the world, a little bit like in academia, but on a much faster level. You put the bid in and you hear back a week later. And if you get that bid and you write a proposal, you put a price on it, and every hour of everybody on the team is calculated, very different from academia in that as well. And if you get that bid, then you get X number of hours to fulfill your part of the project. And I'll give you some specifics. So, for example, I could be told that we're working on a gold mine in Western Kazakhstan, which is it's already been mined for 50 years, but they are redeploying a piece of machinery or a new a part of the mine somewhere nearby, and what they need is an environmental and social impact assessment of that particular project. And so we will generally require a site visit for that. And so that you prepare for the visit, you understand the project as much as you can based on the paperwork, based on the environmental surveys that you can get hold of from the past. You really get immersed in the project over a period of days, sometimes weeks. And then you go on your visit, and it's very quick. Again, the real difference between this and academia is that everything is done very quickly. I think people who have been in academia for a long time, as I did at the beginning, would think that this is a very superficial way of working, but this is a very practical way. You only have X number of hours to dedicate to the job, and you don't go over budget, because if you do, you blow the whole project. The company starts losing money. So it's very important to get everything done in that specific time frame. I would go to site, and I'm a social and environmental specialist. So my role at the moment is primarily on the social side, and I will go in and interview anybody that I think is important within a community and within the operator, within the company, about the project and about its environmental impacts and social impacts. So that involves speaking with mayors, police officers, doctors, nurses, school teachers, farmers in the field, herders, and just normal local people, women's groups, and so on, in tiny villages all over Central Asia and beyond, actually. And also then speak to the operator, speaking to people who work for the mining company and what their roles are and how their social structure is in place, who the bosses are, and how, if they have emergency systems in place, and so on. And then I'll bring all that together, and I'll do that in a matter of days on site. Bring it all together in a report, try to understand what we call the baseline is like. In other words, what are things like now? And then once we know exactly what the project description is like, what they're planning to do, we then try to understand what the impact will be, also having talked to these people. So how will that project affect? And then we'll see in which areas there's predicted to be a negative effect in any way. And if there is a negative effect, that's the key point. That's the real, let's say, the thinking part of it. We come up with ways to mitigate, to reduce these negative impacts and allow the project to go ahead, but at the same time reducing negative impacts on the local populations and the environment. So a little bit of theory, a little bit of traveling and field work, and then the final number crunching at the end.
No, that's great. I mean, that's a very detailed review for all of you listening. I have a very good idea now of exactly what these kind of types of positions require. And something you said at the end with the traveling and everything. I mean, very transparently, how is the work-life balance for these positions? You mentioned how quickly things move. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Somebody who might have a family. Maybe talk a little bit more about the traveling and so forth.
Well, personally, I think it's fine, but I haven't been traveling as intensely as it can get. The one thing about this job that's really still new to me, even after a couple of years, is that things can move very quickly, as I said at the beginning. So we can have one job or no jobs on the go, and we're just putting in bids. And within 2 or 3 days, there could be 4 or 5 bids that are won, and we could be on 4 or 5 projects with back-to-back trips. And it can go that quickly at any point of the year. Now, for me, it hasn't been a huge problem. I'm still flexible. I mean, I have a wife, but we travel a lot anyway, and we're used to that kind of lifestyle. But a good example actually is today, because today is Thursday evening in the UK, and I just found out a few hours ago that I'm going to travel to Kyrgyzstan on Sunday morning, and I'll be there for 10 days. It's quite a long visit. It's a 2 to 3 day trip in each direction, so actually not that much time on site, but quite a long trip. And I just found that out. So in that case, there was a little bit of warning. I knew that there might be something coming up next week, and so I didn't book anything. But there is that issue that trips could come up very, very quickly. And, sometimes it can be frustrating in terms of work-life balance, but I've managed it so far. The one nice thing about it, I have to say, and this differs from company to company, is that you get time and money given back to you for your trips. So if you miss a weekend because of a work trip, you get what's called time off in lieu, which is basically holiday that you tack on to your normal holidays, and you also get extra in terms of salary when you're in the field. So that always helps.
Absolutely. Well, great insights here. So for those of you listening, I think you have a solid understanding, both at a bird's eye view and at a practical day-to-day of what the position looks like, some of the skills you need. We're going to talk a little bit more about skills, but if you have questions. So returning to skills, we talked a little bit about some of these social science skills, transferable skills. What skills do you think the average, STEM PhD, maybe coming out of a lab, maybe they were in, immunology lab or a microbiology lab, or not a zoology lab, or anything related to plants or ecosystems or the environment, what skills would they need to pick up to thrive in this position?
Well, I think knowing a lot of lab-based scientists and having been one and been tempted by the way that you have to think when you're working in a lab, the one really important skill I think that you need when you move into a consultancy role is the ability to let go, the ability to do something well, but not be too much a perfectionist about it. It's not going to be peer-reviewed and published in an academic journal and stay there forever. You have to be able to do things to a really strict deadline that is money-driven, and where you have bosses telling you cannot spend another hour on that. It has to go in right now, and getting things done in that time frame. And that's something that time and time again I see the people who come over from academia, and I had this inclination at the beginning, but it got ironed out by my boss quite quickly. It's that you just get it in, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because the people you're dealing with are not lab-based scientists, experts in their field. They are companies that want to get their project moving, and they need a document and Your work has to be at a good standard, but it does not have to be 100% perfect with the most amazing English and the best figures and so on, like you work towards in academia.
Absolutely. And I think that's very important for you guys to know. We talk a lot about results mattering, and in academia, even if you look at the resumes, right? You think of your resume as a peer-reviewed journal, but it's not. You want to talk about results. This carries all the way through to actually day-to-day work in the job. You got to get the results. You got to get things done, and you'll continually improve. But you can't get frozen by analysis paralysis. So I think that's a really important skill to mention. It is a transferable skill.
Absolutely.
Okay, so those skills are important. Maybe you can talk more about skills through this next series of questions, where I really want to touch on, and we had this come up in the chat box. What is the application and interview process? What does it look like? So let's say if you could go back in time, or you've seen other PhDs get into these roles. Maybe you've even helped some PhDs get into these roles. What are they? Let's say they're networking with the right people. They get a referral, whatever it might be. What does the process look like? Give me an example company they might, other than your own, where they might apply, and just based on your experience in your own company or from what you've seen, what is the interview steps, whether it's a phone screen, whatever else, what does it look like? What did it look like for you?
Well, I was fortunate because I did try during my academic years to reach out and work with these companies, and I spent about a year on a postdoc where I was working in a lab, but for the most part serving as a kind of liaison officer for that lab and trying to set up industry partnerships with the scientists in that lab. So I came across Wardell Armstrong that way, and I knew the people there. And what happened was somebody at the company left, and at that point, because I'd been speaking to them about and in the same role, and the skills fit quite well, they asked me to come in for an interview. But apart from Wardell Armstrong, there are many other environmental consultancies. An example of a very big one around the world is Mott McDonald's. And they generally have quite a lot of jobs that are available. They're very large companies and international, and you apply first, I think, by submitting a CV cover letter for those positions, and then you get interviewed. Another important point, I think, with environmental consultancy is that it's very fluid, and that's also something that's very different from academia. People come and go really quickly. They go from company to company, role to role as they rise through the chain. And that's really important because you get a lot of experience. Every company's different. All the jobs are different in terms of the projects you do. And it's not often something that you will stay in for 10, 20, 30 years. It's something you do for a couple years, move on to the next one, and come back and forth. And I know people at Wardell Armstrong who have been away and are now back and have sort of climbed the ladder that way by going from one to the other to the other. So you shouldn't be afraid to try switching things up now and then and taking on different roles. It's a very, very fluid field and very fast moving. There's a lot of jobs that come up based on the projects that consultancies win. So things can move very, very quickly, and so keep an eye on those vacancy pages.
No, great advice. Thank you for joining us for another Industry Careers for PhDs podcast. If you're interested in attending one of these interviews live, or if you're interested in getting access to the full interview, including all of the background materials and show notes, go to cheekyscientist.com/association and learn how to become an associate. You can get on the wait list for the next association enrollment period there and learn full details about the program. It's a program specifically designed to help PhDs transition into top industry positions. If you would like to receive more of these interview highlights via our podcast sent directly to your email, go to cheekyscientist.com and email subscribe under where it says Start Here. If you haven't already, you can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Until next week, remember your value as a PhD and start thinking and acting like a successful industry professional.